Well, good evening. Can we all hear me? And good. And our online audience, can you hear me? Yes. Now, a very warm welcome to tonight for our George Ramsay Curry Prestige Lecture. Now, for the avoidance of doubt for the Scots, this isn't a curry night. Because they did ask me, is this a curry night? No. Prestige Lecture. So, very warm welcome to in the room and especially online as well. In terms of audience, I always like to get a feel of our audience. So first question, who is our furthest travelled? Who's travelled the furthest to get here?
It's you.
No. Listen, there must be more than me. I'm Falkirk. Can anyone beat Falkirk?
I'm further to the station than you are.
Oh, that's very true, yes. It's not often we have two people from Pullman. We have usually several people from Linlithgow, but that's another story. So, can anyone beat Pullman and Falkirk? Who's a third furthest travelled then? Anyone? Well, people from Derby, surely. I know we've got Derby, we've got James from Derby already. We've got James Derby, so... Where, John? Haworth. Okay, we're not doing too bad. So, we've got two Scots in the audience. Not very diverse, but they will. Okay, who attended the lecture on gauging today? Brilliant. So we've kept you. So this is you going for your 2-for-1 offer. What's not to like? And who's just coming for tonight? Who's just a night attendees? A very warm. You missed a brilliant set of lectures this morning. Absolutely brilliant. We had a real full audience. The gauging stuff was excellent. So please come along to future events. Okay. Now, just as I always do, I always take the challenge of the Challenge 42. Those who have been at luncheon, those who have been at lectures, I've seen it all before, but I'm going to still plug. I've got 3 months before I get bombed out. So, over 42s, let's have you standing up. Let's see you. Get a bit of energy in the room. Okay. Bloody hell, there's a lot of yous. David Polhill, I know you're not over 40. I know you're over 42. Yep. Sorry? 42s and under can sit down. So it's 40, over 42s. Okay. Yep, the usual, we're about some kind of white male stainless, very male. We'll give us that. Sorry, we've got two very generic. Right, our under 42s and under. Please stand up. Brilliant. Now, gender-wise, as a percentage, you're better. Ethnicity, not quite, but great to have you in the room. Now, I always say to you people, you are the people that will deliver the promises that Rufus will make today. So be very careful. Whatever he says, he goes, oh, we've got to do that. But no, in all seriousness, really want to get more of the under 42s involved in any way. It can be as simple as who you invite in a meeting. So it doesn't matter about a lecture or best pieces. So if you're in your meeting one time, you look at me and go, how many under 42s have I got? Have a ponder, because you're the people who bring diversity of thought, and that's something you think. So please sit down. So I always just say, so don't worry, next year's chair won't do that, you'll be fine. So it's just my own personal thing. Okay, speaking of events and things to attend, hopefully there's going to be a slide up here. I've got to introduce me. I'm Ian Wright, by the way, but you probably gathered that. Go to the next slide. We're going to come back to Rail 200, if you don't mind. I think, do we have a slide on all our events coming up? I'm looking at my IT people. Here we go. So, gauging event was fantastic. They had a lot of people in the audience. Our next event is we have rolling stock batteries and BEMUs on the 8th of May. It's another double header. So at night, we've got the Future Rail competition, which is something I'm really passionate about. So please come along to BMUs, very, very current, very, very topical. And in the evening, we have the young members as well. So please come along to that. Get that in your diary today and sign up. We have next year's chair, Rebecca, presentation on the 10th of September in this very place. So we look forward to that. Again, get that into your diary tonight. And the George Stephenson Lecture celebrating 200 years of railway. As I say, in Scotland, we are 208, but never mind, you'll catch up with us eventually. 26th September in Darlington. So there's some dates, pencil them down, great to have you in the audience. Speaking about celebrating Rail 200, there's a Rail 200 slide coming up. Well, there was one before. So, we're exciting times at Rail 200. My advice is there's lots of events in Rail 200. Get along to them. There's a fantastic event in terms of the Greatest Gathering. I've heard that the Alstom Railway Challenge team have got the locomotive there. Please come along to any Rail 200 event. No respect. One thing I'll just tell you, you probably won't get to Rail 300, so grab the Rail 200 when it's there. One showing only, so please come along. There's lots of things happening. Please do that. So, exciting, 200 years of railway, but we're an exciting bit of the railway just now. We've got rail reform, we've got GBR coming along as well. So there's lots of exciting things. So we've already had Peter Hendy giving the policy side of things about rail reform and Great British Railways transition team and Shadow Great British Railways. So who better to come along and talk about Great British Railways transition team than the lead director himself, Rufus Boyd. I've had the pleasure of knowing Rufus for about 18 years. This was the good old Interfleet days. Who's from Interfleet? Give us a little hands of the Interfleet people. The good old days, there we are. Well, Rufus was part of the smart team within Interfleet. They were so smart, they weren't part of Interfleet. They were called Transport Advisory. They didn't want to badge themselves. The Interfleet were just the engineers, and they were the smart people. And that's very true about Rufus. So I'm just bumming you up here. So a very warm welcome to Rufus, part of the smart team of Interfleet technology. And we look forward to your presentation on your reflections of Great British Railways and the transition team and next step forward. Over to Rufus. Thank you, Rufus.
Thank you, Ian. Regrettably, everything Ian has said is true, but it's a pleasure to be here, Ian, and amongst august companies, some of whom I know very well, partly because of the Interfleet connections, but partly for just how long I've been in the sector, which is perilously close to 40 years now. It's great to be invited to speak, it really is. It's a very significant and historic moment, as Ian quite rightly says, for the sector, an industry that so many of us have made such a big personal investment in. My story, as I say, started nearly 40 years ago. I began at British Rail as a graduate trainee, general management as it was known, with my first appointment, not actually appointment, I applied for it, to be a supervisor at Euston, which in the mid-80s was quite some place and has many of the same problems today that I saw then in terms of management of pedestrian movement around the station. Extraordinary place. I then became station manager at Derby and then moved on through my career to Railtrack, South West Trains, and supporting both directly Stagecoach, the owning group, and a number of bidders thereafter when I became an independent contractor. I think of all my achievements, obviously I have quite a bit of kind of commercial background, but actually my perhaps fondest achievement rather than greatest was working on the 455 refurbishment project, which I know at least one of you in the room has worked on, a project that continues to deliver benefits extraordinarily, actually, that we didn't think it had long to go. We thought it was about 10 more years, but look at it, kept on delivering because it was so well designed. A metrification project before even TfL got going on them. What is true, continues to be true, gratefully, is that the rail industry is full of talented and passionate people who want to see the railway thrive. And people who come from outside the sector in constantly refer to that spirit. And over the years, it is true that the fragmentation of structures has prevented a lot of people from doing their best work and what actually motivates them to work. Now, I come to the end of my stint as lead director for Great British Railways Transition Team because GBRTT itself will cease to exist as an arm's length body from the 1st of April. There's no shame in that. You will have heard elsewhere about the government's plans to move to a different model. But in that period, I have been right at the front line of rail reform, which is absolutely critical to our sector. And those seismic changes are happening. They're very real. Rail sits right at the heart of government and its thinking, and it actually has, as a policy proposition, a lot of electoral recognition. You know, this is what marks the current government out. So it's going to have to be delivered well. And I want to reflect a bit on some of the things we've achieved so far and some of the things that are yet to be done. So I said that in about a week's time we'll cease to exist officially. We move into a new phase. What have we actually achieved in the years we've been around? Which, broadly speaking, is 3, but reform is nearly a 6.5-year programme if I count the length of time I've been on it. GBRTT very specifically was set up by the last government on a particular model to prepare the groundwork for the formation of GBR, and a focus on designing a simpler, better railways for everyone in Britain. The benefits would not just accrue to the users, but to the non-users as well. I work very closely with the department, Network Rail, train operators, mayoral combined authorities, and the supply chain to bring the sector together to imagine what that future might be and embed reform. Because the big challenge of government is not its vision for GBR, which was always a legislative requirement, what you would have to do to achieve it. It's what do you do in the interim to bring forward the benefits. So what we did was to, and I think we had to do this incidentally, was to recruit a diverse team, exactly for the reason Ian said. It is diversity of thought that we needed if we were to truly do reform. So we drew from across the sector. Staff were seconded from 17 different organisations with people based from every nation and region in Britain in our team. And that was very important to me, very important to us. And as you can tell from Ian, it is key to making the sector work. We did focus in the detail on the design of what GBR would be as an organisation. We had that mandate. It was a piece of work that continues to deliver in the new model, continue to work under the new government's guidance, and all that good work we've done didn't die. It's been used very usefully. But what I should say, of course, and you will know this, is the last government's model was a public-private partnership model, and the current government has had a significant change of focus with public ownership firmly at the heart of rail reform. That move really does seek to put people at the heart of the railways and ensure that the industry is laser focused on what matters most to passengers and freight users. And I'm really pleased that even though there's been this major shift of model from public-private to public, that we have had so many of our concepts work through into the emerging design model. This kind of whole industry mindset, you've heard it elsewhere, track and train, but actually bringing the financial issues together, because if you don't bring the finances together, you can't make the trade-offs and decisions that are necessary. I think also critically, as a principle, devolving to the lowest sustainable level in the organisation decision-making is a key feature that we've managed to keep in play under the new government's way of thinking. I would add, and we do say this, and we don't say this apologetically, that even under a public ownership model, the private sector remains a critical player. We did a lot of work with the supply chain and continue to do it. And at GBRTT, we currently calculate that even under the public ownership programme, something like 60% of total industry spend will be in the private sector. So the importance of the supply chain in delivering innovation and growth and opportunity remains key. Now, GBRTT, having been mandated to get ahead on early deliverables, did actually do a lot that I'm hugely proud of. Many of the tools and ways of working that are now starting to embed were developed at GBRTT and are now fundamentally underpinning how we think of what GBR will do and how it is designed. And I just want to highlight a few of those examples that is a kind of one railway single system mindset that will be essential for GBR to succeed. The first of which we describe as the whole industry financial model. And the aim here was to create a single, simpler view of whole railway finances at the most granular level. In fact, actually engineering line reference level if you go right to the detail, and make that information available to operational decision makers in an easy-to-use tool. Now, of course, it's very easy to say easy to use having done the training, but still a relatively easy-to-use tool. Already Network Rail was able to pick out £27 million worth of savings last year, and we believe over the control period will help save a further 100 million more. It's that effective at drawing managers' eyes to where cost and revenues come together. Now, we often talk about driving costs down in the railway, and it is hugely important, but the destination we need to achieve true financial sustainability starts with the top line, i.e. revenue. And what separates us from so many other public sector organisations is that we are and need to be increasingly commercially minded. Some of our best work at GBRTT was actually focusing on revenue optimisation. Having the ability to accurately measure revenue is the only way you can effectively manage it. And that, of course, wasn't done under the old model. It was perhaps done through RDG. I'm not saying we did nothing, but effectively the commercial arrangements did not lend itself to that aggregation of revenue. And once you can do that, you can start analysing it properly, and then you can start optimising and growing revenue. As I say, that's the only true route to financial sustainability. We cannot cut our way out of the current sustainability problem that we have. So we had some key tools. I'm very proud of these tools. We had the passenger revenue optimisation plan, which was really what could we do, what headroom was there, what could we attack. And then there was, I mean, these were great because it wasn't just GBRTT, it was done in conjunction with rail operators, RDG, and indeed Network Rail, which has quite a smart revenue team. But there were other products, and in particular, there was a new industry revenue model which we needed to deal with the post-COVID impacts and to predict and project how we were going to grow out of that. Key thing, of course, management information given to leaders and allows interventions to be made. And I'm not going to make a big thing about it here, but our various rail sales that we've achieved, including the latest one, Badge Rail 200, have been hugely effective and successful, not just in revenue generation, but actually in persuading people within government to kind of let loose the apron strings a bit in terms of allowing the sector to make its own decisions on this. Ultimately, of course, this is all about driving down the subsidy gap. And on that basis, I also want to talk a bit about fares, ticketing and retail. Won't naturally lend itself to mechanical engineers, but a reminder that not everything that we do is kind of hard-edged hardware. Our work in transforming digital rail ticketing really is enabling the industry to reimagine its business model, and particularly to address what passengers want. The assumptions that passengers are actually happy with Magstrite or happy with our very, very clunky systems is just wrong. People expect exceptional self-service models and they expect a digital experience driven out of a phone. So more and more customers will see and feel these benefits, which currently rather unevenly fall in London, where it works, outside of London less good, but on the move. And we've heard really positive announcements about 75 stations at West Midlands and 17 stations in Greater Manchester who will receive a classic tap-in, tap-out model of fares distribution, which is great. We've also got trials in Yorkshire and the East Midlands, so now as these new mayoralities come on, this will be a key ask and something that we will have to deliver. And it matters because most customers' first contact with the railway is the ticket they purchase, and that better be a good experience if you actually want them to travel. We must drive on and deliver this drumbeat of things. This is a proper programme with proper milestones. We're going to have to deliver it to improve experiences for passengers. It's the fundamental, I think, of all the reforms we're doing. And lastly, I want to pick up one real point of personal pride. I know it's important to the institution and engineering more broadly, and that is culture change. It's wherever you go, there is a problem of railway culture still feeling a bit old-fashioned, and the need to move it on, and Ian's been very eloquent on some of that. We have definitely sparked an industry-wide conversation out of GBRTT. I make no excuse for the amount I post on these matters on LinkedIn and other social media. But the real thing is working out how to get people empowered to make decisions, feeling comfortable actually stepping into things that in a world where we've socialised and syndicated risk, actually to make personal decisions and accountable decisions themselves. And so it's really important that not only do we empower, but we think about how we recruit, who we recruit, where from. I talked about those 17 different organisations, and the importance of equity, equality, diversity and inclusion. Under attack in other parts of the world, but supremely important to the way we achieve the right level of diverse thought that Ian was talking about. And we're proud of what we've done. 7% of our job offers have been to women, 25% of our job offers to ethnic minorities. This is significantly above industry averages. I know we're a white-collar organisation, but it is still significantly above. But this is the tip of the iceberg. There's much more to do, and it's quite easy to do with an organisation of 200 to 250 people. When we start talking about organisations of tens of thousands, culture change becomes very, very difficult, and we will have to think about incentives and motivators to culture change, not just tonal setting. It's going to be more important than that. But we are working very specifically on certain models. We do have a unified sector-wide EDI maturity model. I think that's a really useful tool for bringing us all up to a common standard in that area of culture. And it's a privilege, really, to have had the chance to have started with a blank piece of paper and had to develop a cultural model. And I know that as new organisations step into the pitch, DFTO, the department's operator, for example, is a relatively young organisation with tens of people, not hundreds of people, and it will be able to carry the torch forward. And in fact, we're transferring ownership of the EDI work we've done to them, which is a signifier of our faith that they will carry that on. Now, GBRTT was always a transition team, therefore always temporary. It did not have the appropriate levers. It was not vested in levers to affect sector-wide change. We were given things, we were commissioned things, we were asked to do things, but we were not fundamentally a free agent to decide what we did. Shadow GPR will have levers, though. It will be able to bring the best of the sector together, DFT, Network Rail, and DFT Operator, and actually use those levers, which are fundamentally government levers, to affect change and ensure that customer-focused priorities emerge, and this is exactly what the Secretary of State wants. We still face some big challenges, though, and decision-making still ultimately rests too close, in my opinion, to ministers and Whitehall for things to be done efficiently, and I'll come back to that shortly. The current government agenda is to push decision-making out, and you will see that particularly with mayors and strategic authorities. They're going to have a role in decision-making. That's been set out in the Railways Bill consultation. We need to ensure that GBR is a more responsive organisation that can operate at that local level and ensure that the government's devolution plans work. But of course, they too will be party to those trade-offs decisions and the need to deliver a quality service to customers, whichever customers they are. And that will include, of course, long-distance leisure traveller and freight. These are important sectors of the world that don't naturally always sit on the mayoral agenda. If we were looking at what is key to deliver, in my view, independence of GBR sits right at the top. The ability to make decision-making puts customer front and centre. Creeping micromanagement since the seismic shock of COVID is really holding large parts of the sector back and continues to do so. And it's really, really important that the government's proposals currently being consulted on give GBR the freedom to take all the important operational and commercial decisions and to make them swiftly. How much of this we achieve, of course, will be down to the passage of the bill, out for consultation now, as I said, but slated for later in the year, second reading later in the year in autumn. It's a real fork in the road moment for us, and it's really worth reflecting on this, a chance to declutter the sector's regulatory tangle, and it is a tangle. Potentially, if we get it wrong, set us back by creating more duties, overlapping duties even, obligations, licence conditions and cost. So it's a real moment for us to watch and to watch out. Equally important, in my opinion, is that commerciality, what one might describe as a trading mindset, which has been in retreat for quite a long time, must come back together. We must bring a revenue-generating zeal back to the sector and a customer focus that I actually saw grow from the very moment I joined the sector back in 1987. That pathway of commerciality was on an upward trajectory, but not only is it now stalled, in my opinion, it's at profound risk of going backwards. Again, this demands decisions made swiftly, decisions made well, and it should allow customers, the supply chain, mayors, other opinion makers, some comfort on which they can then make their own decisions. I'm of the opinion, and I gave these thoughts earlier when we were downstairs, that actually we have too much of our activity is zombie-like or vampire-like, and we really need to move quickly and deliver the priorities instead. Now, there is, of course, some fascination that sits around commerciality, and I wanted to alight on something peculiarly important to me, and that is the brand of GBR. We have a real challenge about whether it will be red, white and blue, and you may have seen some speculation on that, or what is the role of the double arrow. And unfortunately, not only am I not here to speculate on that, I'm really just saying that is not what brand is about. That is a logo, that is identity. It is not the essence of what we're trying to achieve. The colour palette is not the answer. It's much, much more than that. It's what GBR represents for the community. And I say to people in the room, this is the thing we're going to have to watch. This will be the litmus test of how commercial we intend to be. Because the whole life value, commercial value of a well-executed brand for GBR will be measured in hundreds of millions of pounds of net present value. I mean, a huge, huge number. And it will give a deep sense, it will project a deep sense of what Britain's Railways does for our customers and their communities and our economy, how it motivates the people who work in the sector. And it should drive customers towards it. It should help with that top-line problem and achieve sustainable mode shift. These are all the things that are in the government's agenda, not least by addressing those people, Ian, who are under 42, who have very, very high expectations. They're digitally savvy, they're resolutely modern and inclusive behaviourally, and they want great value. And the real risk of taking the wrong fork in the road at this point sits in front of us. We cannot afford to be another monolithic sector. We're too heavily bureaucratic. We need to be efficient, lean and dynamic, and we need a brand that supports it. Now, this is the government's agenda, let's be clear. And I don't think we can duck that need for being lean and dynamic. Quite interesting for those who follow it, Oxera produced a really interesting opinion piece on how the Bank of England had actually created extraordinary dynamism since its independence, free from short-term political interference. But one also senses that the current government has a broader anxiety. Look at the decisions it recently has made on NHS England. And we have to be in the right place. We have to be in the right place for this, because GBR will need to be different. We are an arm's length body, of course, or we will be, but we'll be different from many others, because I cannot think of an equivalent that has this necessary level of commerciality in it. And that should distinguish us and define us in its formation, culture and behaviours. We will be, GBR, when we arrive, a better, more efficient partner for the supply chain. We'll be a consistent national player that helps the country, our nations and regions, achieve their growth targets and ambitions. It will be a better and appealing place to work, Ian, yes, for those under 42, and possibly for those of us who've got a few years left, if not so many. And fundamentally, it will be an organisation that acts as any customer-focused business would do, operating, however, exclusively in the public interest. The One Railway tools I spoke about earlier, the ones we developed at GBRTT, will flourish, they will find their moment, and they will help organisations flourish by giving them some levers to enact change and give them a tool to pick up and run with. Put simply, what's going to happen now is you'll see much, much less about GBRTT, but you'll see a lot more about the tools we gave the sector and how they've been used as they're embedded across the SGBR family. I hope and do genuinely believe that the prevailing culture, whether we seed it with GBRTT alumni or whether we do it by just creating a broader culture of leaving the badge at the door and championing a simpler, better railway, continues to lead us forward from after April the 1st to a more sustainable, financially sustainable, commercially driven sector and an industry that delivers for its funders, passengers and staff. And thank you for allowing me the time to make those reflections. Sorry.
Now the fun bit, we've got a Q&A. This is your time. And that's fact, Rufus did mention he's moving on. This is a great time to ask someone because it can be a bit more honest as well. I don't want to speak now, but there's an opportunity. So this is about open to questions now.
Thank you. Sorry, given I'm still working in the sector, please assume I will be candid, but within certain boundaries. Thank you.
Now, we do have a roaming mic, I hope, so our online audience can hear it. So, do we have a roaming mic? That was maybe an assumption too many. I think the people at the back are looking for a roaming mic. Yeah, please, Rebecca, thank you.
Do you want the lectern or the seat?
Well, I don't know. Shall I?
You
can be close if we like.
You sit there, Rufus.
Yeah, I'm standing up.
Sorry, I was just moving to the microphone rather than the microphone moving to me. So, thank you very much, Rufus. And I was tantalised by a couple of threads that you didn't take further, so I wanted to ask about those. One was, you said it would be simpler and better for users. Yeah, I got that. And you said, and non-users. And that was tantalising. And I wondered whether I was over-connecting to connect that with the achieving a sustainable mode shift. Is it to do with attracting not only appealing workplace for us to work in, but attracting more people who are currently non-users to be users in mode shift? Or is it about value for money for the taxpayer? Are they the non-users you're referring to? I just wondered if you'd like to elaborate on that.
Yeah, happily, Rebecca. It's a very, very good question. But one of the things that, we'll switch modes when the mic comes down. But one of the things that I learned very quickly, and it was partly because of Lord Hendy and his contribution to GBRTT when he was vice chair, was that the railways had kind of lost sight of its economic benefits that it created for communities. And that if you looked at the transformation that the Mayor was able to achieve, even just looking at rail, forget all the other modes in his disposal, then what you were seeing was an economic transformation of parts of London that the railway had not been able to achieve when you got the model right and the product right. And I think I grew up in a railway that was profoundly about reducing subsidy and was all about net subsidy reduction, net subsidy reduction, which is fine because we were trying to transform the railway. But I think understanding the benefit to communities, I mean, the non-user benefits are huge. And I think it's just a new language we're going to have to learn. Now, of course, transport economists absolutely understand about externalities and all the rest of it. But I suspect most operationally minded people, or dare I say engineers, probably don't think in that lexicon. And we have to. So that is the benefit. Simpler and better. So let's imagine you're the Mayor of Manchester, just to pick any person, low profile, trying to get on with stuff. You know, who do I call? Who do I call when I want something done? Oh, well, you'll need Northern and you'll need TPT. By the way, but Network Rail Region will be involved. And but Whitehall probably do. It's not a basis for running a devolved structure. So I think this government's commitment to push more out to Mayoral Combined Authorities, later MSAs, is really, the railway has to reorganise to be simpler for that interface. I can't see, you know, if we resisted it, we'd be washed over in the tide of history, frankly. Is it okay if I switch to the lecture? Just
Yes. Thank you, Rebecca. Do we have our next question from the audience? We've got Felix here, please, Felix.
There's a microphone. Excellent. We very often behave as though there's only one railway in the world, and that's the railway in Great Britain. And I noticed that an awful lot. And we need to learn from the others as well. They're not all terrible. Some of them are dreadful, but others are doing a very good job. And so what methods have we got to adopt learning and to actually spread it in Great Britain as well? I'm not talking about Northern Ireland because they're learning from the south.
So it's a very good question, and so there are phases in which we've embraced kind of international benchmarking, and certainly the Williams Review itself had a huge international benchmarking piece in the heart of it when it was in our transition phase, but just before we set up GBRTT, I also undertook a bit of international work, and we certainly thought a lot about it when we were in the public-private partnership model, because there seemed to be so many interesting things, say you learn from Germany or the Netherlands or so on about it. I think we're not at a particular phase of that international perspective now, but we will come back to it, I'm sure. And it's an important point you make. What is quite interesting is how many people have been coming the other way recently. I think the bringing track and train together piece has attracted certain foreign countries to, that might help us. So some of the smaller countries, working under current European rail packages are saying, well, how could we deliver that and yet stay within the principles of EU integration? If you're talking about it at a technical level, that's probably more than I know about. I mean, I genuinely don't know the benefits and disbenefits of various types of electrification, traction and so on, but I mean that, I'm assuming, broadly speaking, is delivered by excellence in the supply chains, where you actually get the right manufacturers put forward the opportunity. What I would say is everybody I've met in broader supply chain has always said we have a rather rigid standards model, and therefore there's got to be something in that. But I'm probably not best to talk on that, because clearly standards help things simpler for people. But if they become so sclerotic that nothing ever changes, then it becomes a drag anchor on. So I think the answer, to summarise, is we have done it at various points. It just so happens at this particular phase, I think, with a manifesto commitment and a deep commitment to public ownership, that's probably not top of head for people now.
Okay. I'll do a little plug here. Don't forget this annual railway technical tour, where we can visit our friends in the continent. So those who have not signed up, there's still opportunities, especially those younger. So a little plug there for the railway technical tour. Robin.
Robin Grote, retired from the DFT. Two questions, because it's like, it's a bit cheeky to try and get two questions in. But so the first one is about your point about the top level, the commerciality, and thinking about particularly fares. Could we have gone further, where we've got a situation where the Secretary of State is pretty much taking all revenue risk? Why have we still today got TOC-specific fares? Why isn't that? You talked about young people wanting that simplicity and value, yet we've got a legacy there. Was there not an opportunity to go further and faster on some of those things? And the second one, kind of not particularly related, but in the new world where we've got the track and train joined up with the route director potentially commanding all of the people to deliver the railway under their authority, where do those people come from? Who are they? And what are they going to look like?
Thank you very much. So I won't do those in reverse order. Let's deal with them in the order they came. The first thing on fare simplification is I do believe it is the government's broader intention to declutter fares. I mean, this is stated objective. And you are quite right that the more you have operator-specific fares, the more challenging it is to do that. That said, the direction of travel is towards single-leg pricing. So there will be a price for your journey, and that'll be it. That creates the right price signals, and it creates the simplicity. And once you've gone digital pretty well, it follows form. But yes, it is one of those oddities that kind of the more, and we used to do it under BR, Robin, you know, back in the day, we were always creating a little bit more complexity because there was a bit more money to be had. And in the end, just one day you have to go and reform it all and start on first principles, don't you? So I think that is the government's preferred direction of travel. And I think the LNER Fares Simplification Pilot, which is effectively a single leg pricing pilot, has proven to be very successful, although transitionally quite unpopular. There's always someone who loses in a fares change, a simplification change, but I think broadly it'll settle in. On the route director concept, so I think what Robin is referring to is, I'm just going to kind of explain it in the language we've been working in. In design, when I said we have to work to a level in the organisation where decision makers exist, I think there's a commonly held view that the decision-making is best done at a kind of human-scaled geography. And that might be, and this is not setting anything in stone because geographies are still up for debate, but let's imagine something the scale of East Anglia or the scale of, say, Kent or Kent and Sussex together. These would be things in which a leader plausibly can manage the challenges under their control. If you make it too big, you're asking people effectively to run a FTSE 250 company. So not actually, you start to lose the ability to really get your mind around the problems. So I think let's get it to a human scale, something that people can manage, that the CV, you can attract talent because it will come to these jobs because they're doable. And you're also not creating a problem for government by creating jobs that are way beyond what the Prime Minister gets paid and therefore creates a problem for Treasury. So you've got a chance to put it down. I think it will be railway people. You and I, Robin, went through a transition from public to private, and a remarkable number of public servants were able to make that transition. They were commercial when they wanted to be, and I think we'll find the same in the reverse, that a number of commercially minded people will be able to get their arms around a track train proposition. There will be some from outside, I don't doubt. But I think what is key is that we create the training environment for young professionals, some of whom are in this room, to imagine themselves being capable of doing those jobs. So we have to move quite quickly. Everyone talks about the BR graduate training scheme. It doesn't have to be graduate training, it just has to be any training now has to come with a real track train flavour to it. And that's how I would do it.
Yeah, any more questions from the... Can I just take one online here, just to be fair to online? It's a bit technical, so feel free if you will listen. It's considering the advancement of materials, science and engineering, particularly lightweight composites and high-strength alloys, how can these be practically implemented into the current railway infrastructure and rolling stock design to improve energy efficiency, reduce life cycle costs, and the remaining challenges in the widespread adoption? So
who asked the question?
It's unknown, unfortunately. I don't have the name.
It's not Peter Curtis. All right. Well, let's assume it's. So, can I answer the question a bit like I answered it earlier? How do you get innovation into an industry of our size and scale is a hugely challenging question, because you've got multiple models, and for people who follow Roger Ford, he took a view on Twitter on this, which was the tier ones will do it. Now, I think that's an approach, but it can't be the only approach. And if it is the approach you take, you have to incentivise tier ones to change their models to accept the principle that that innovation might actually be worth the investment. The second way you do it is to create a structure where, if you believe those innovations are made below tier one, somewhere else, something that protects the value of their R&D investment as that investment is nurtured through to whatever type of integration you're doing. The model that kind of, it kind of works, but I suspect doesn't work quite enough, is first of a kind stuff gets you so far, but it only really takes you to the valley of death, to adoption, and so I sense that it's a blend of encouraging and incentivising tier ones to attract SME and innovation talent if they're not doing it themselves, And then secondly, per the earlier point, creating a standards environment which contemplates that standards might change. I mean, radically change, not at the margins, but might radically change. The other final point, I guess, is the supply chain, when you talk to them in the dirty detail of it, will say they quite like national standards because they hate having to play in different spaces. They just don't have the... Well, the economies of scale don't suit them if they have to play 5 times different or 10 times different around the country. But there ought to be some opportunity in new model and new world for regions to say, we'd like to trial and we'd like to be held accountable for a major change in the way we think about how things are constructed. And, you know, and one imagines in new model that might be doable. That's how we used to do it if you're old enough.
Thank you for that. I think we've got a few more questions from the floor. Go for Malcolm, please. Jason, oh sorry, Jason, you've already got... Right, Jason, since you've got the microphone, you can have another one.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
One more,
yeah,
only.
thanks, Rufus. A really interesting talk. My question was a point touched on earlier. When I talk to friends and family who aren't necessarily, might use trains but not in the industry, there's 2 perceptions that I think they get from the media. One is perhaps in some cases an unfair reflection on how good we are at delivering projects, so the sort of CapEx side of life. And the other message I get often is my train was late or the train wasn't clean, so the sort of day-to-day delivery. And I think it's not unfair to say that perhaps the perception in both of those things is true. I can see how the sort of top-level plans that you've described today would address those, but are there any nuances out of the work you've done and how you see GBR going forward that would tackle sort of project delivery aspect of railways and making it better versus just getting the day-to-day stuff right?
Okay, so let's unpick some of that. My boss, Andrew Haynes, gave what is internally known as the Sheffield speech. He gave at a select audience hosted at Arup. And the Sheffield speech said, which spoke about CapEx expenditure, particularly from a Network Rail perspective, but I think it could have applied to many other perspectives of other buyers of CapEx, which is there has been no jeopardy for piling costs onto CapEx projects, particularly from Top World. I grew up, as did Andrew, in a world where projects were commercially led. So we need a new train and we're going to have a sprinter or whatever it was. And the design of that was absolutely driven by customer experience and financial sustainability. In the current world, and particularly a rather bastardized version of the privatisation model, because we're now 25 years on and it's had bells and whistles added to it, the reality is that mechanisms such as Schedule 4 and Schedule 8, the things that create an incentive mechanism for performance and running projects relatively well, and network change and vehicle change, which you all both know about both of those, have actually created an opportunity to load costs onto projects, particularly OPEX costs, masquerading as CapEx costs. And there's been no jeopardy. Now, we spoke earlier, didn't we, Robin's point about, you know, who's that route director who's going to be in charge? That route director isn't going to let the operating manager or the engineering manager load their overhead line project with stupid cost, are they? Because that's what bringing track and train together is, single P&L. And they're going to want those outputs delivered on time, and they're going to want all the other things that come with it. So I think bringing that jeopardy back is key, and I think that will be hugely transformative. I mean, that's the single biggest incentive I can think of to getting projects done well. On the question of how you get the ordinary delivery of day-to-day performance right, of course, the track and train thing holds true as well, doesn't it? You know, single accountability. We should reflect on the fact that the public-private partnership had quite a lot of jeopardy on the private sector to deliver because there was a contract that incentivised them to deliver and there was revenue risk. So take revenue risk off and take contract penalty off. Why would I, route director East Anglia, for want of a better job, do my job properly? And we have to imagine new incentives, don't we, for people to be excellent. and you can think through them. These are not designed, but you can think through them. Benchmarking's pretty good. Being 10th out of a table of 10 pretty well motivates people. It certainly did in Old World. You know, that's the route to promotion, isn't it? It isn't being 10th in a table of 10 that gets you your next job, is it? It's being first. And that kind of competitive benchmarking, as long as you don't get too much silliness at the margins, will be a huge benefit. I think, and of course, benchmarking needs proper data. We haven't had proper industry data for ages that we can really use to that. Hence the value of the models we've developed. And then I think there's something else about, you know, please don't let's kill management incentivisation. You know, let the high performers get a bit more than the lower performers. You know, let's do some stuff around the margins of that. So I think there is something there that can be done. And pride in your railway will matter, but I don't think it'll get you over the line on its own.
Thank you.
I'm going to just ask a question as Mike gets passed along. From a Scottish point of view, we've had track and train together.
Yeah.
It is of the size where you can get your hand right about it. And we are of the size where Bill could phone up and say, this wasn't acceptable. Looking at ScotRail as a model, could you give me a couple of examples, or maybe one example of where it's really good, but equally look at it in terms of tell that it's not so good here. So I don't want you to be, give me one good thing about what we're doing in Scotland, one bad thing you might have observed about Scotland, so or an area to improve in Scotland.
In fairness to Bill, a lot of what I see and hear is hearsay, or is based on my journeys in Scotland, which isn't how. That's not proper management information. But let me reflect just on the track and train together thing. Ideally, for Scotland to really be excellent, it should be competing against all the other English regions on a broadly comparable basis, shouldn't it? Because then you'd really know. And I think that will be helpful to Scotland, be helpful for other places as well. And I think, I may be wrong about this, but I think when we talk about whole industry financial models, I think that the work we've done is slightly ahead of where Scotland is. So they do have whole industry finances, but I am told that, relatively speaking, the maturity of the work is slightly in our favour. But there's not much that I don't like. So you're from Falkirk, right?
Yes. Yep.
So my eldest used to be in the Edinburgh Fringe. Nobody in their right mind goes to Edinburgh in the Edinburgh Fringe. So I used to stay in Falkirk and come in on the trains. I have never been disappointed by ScotRail trains along the Glasgow-Edinburgh route. They're exceptional, and I've taken a few around that as well. And you know, why would you trash talk a railway that's well performing? And I have to say, I was out in Wales seeing GCRE the other day. I think the Welsh Railway has transformed in the last 5 years. I think the key question is it a sustainable model financially? And again, I haven't opened their books, so I wouldn't know, but that's probably their big challenge. But it's not bad for customers, it's a great railway.
I do like your bit about that benchmarking against. We think we're good, but are we really good?
Well, and you don't, and there is no comparable benchmark because it's apples and pears of it at the moment.
Malcolm.
Rufus, thank you very much for your talk, but I've got two questions like Robin. First one is about the entrepreneurial spirit of route directors, or whatever we call them. I'm minded of the West Midlands, London Midland service that is introduced between Euston and Crewe about 15 years ago, started with a fairly empty 4-car train and now runs with very heavily loaded 8-car trains. So it's very successful, but they're not metro mayors. So who would have the incentive to see a commercial opportunity and then exploit it? The second question is, relatively few customers want to travel from station X to station Y. They want to travel from their starting location to their destination location. So where are the opportunities in GBR to integrate with local transport to get people to where they actually want to get to rather than the station?
Okay, so I will do those in reverse order if I might. On integration, so I talked about the PROP, the Revenue Optimisation Plan. The biggest headroom opportunity is getting the railway more accessible to people who are further away from it than walk up, you know. But that's very, very expensive to do if you want a universal model. But we're starting to see amongst the young a trend towards no driving licence, no car. So actually, it's not just, you know, could we do it? It might become a bit of an imperative to do it if you're going to make a difference. Where would you start? Well, you'd start with the mayoral combined authorities, because the agglomeration that you achieve in cities allows, you know, frequency of bus links, trams, and all the other paraphernalia. The railway should not try and organise that for itself. The mayors are perfectly placed to do that. So let's give them the powers, opportunities. Let's give them the chance to brand. You know, I said that hugely important to me that GBR gets a coherent brand model. I don't think that's a diffusion of brands, but quite clearly there is no point in GBR stomping all over Greater Manchester and saying, this B network stuff's rubbish, you know, give it to us. That's not going to work. What's going to work is giving Burnham and his colleagues the chance to create that integration using brand as the means to do it. If we go out into the rural areas, it is quite different. You know, the bus networks are not solid, frequencies are quite poor, but it's not always true. I'm very lucky where I live in Winchester, we have good bus networks around. But what are you going to do? Well, I think what you've got to do is the railway has got to be open for business to people who say, you know, could you help us? What can you do? And it may be it's just very simply around the station environment and making it easier for those networks to join and plug in, rather than trying to constantly facilitate timetables. You should just say, you know, we're going to make the infrastructure work. But it's very, very expensive to do at a national scale, but clearly very deliverable to do when we look at the mayoral combined authorities, which of course is the current and modern model. I can see, you know, there'll be more mayors, let's put it that way, so it'll be easier to do. Coming back to number one, and entrepreneurial spirit, I mean, I think there's competing tensions here, aren't there? The private sector operators have been quite good at seeing opportunities on the margin. We could get in there, we could take a bit of money out of this, and have responded in terms of service quality, price structure, and so on and so forth. There is also a strategic issue, though, which is if you've only got one West Coast main line, who has access to it? And I think that getting that trade right between a little bit of flair, which won't be private sector now, but could quite easily be a new route director in Robin's model that says, oh, I've got a plan, boss, you know, let's give it a go. But strategically, you might say, I'm really sorry, we have given that every sixth part of the hour will be freight, and that's the deal. So you're going to have to balance strategic mindset with the chance to play at the margins. I think the way you do that is devolving as many decisions as you can to the local level while protecting national operators who need it, notably freight, but high-speed long distance as well. And open access, which the government is often seen as being very negative about, but I think is relatively happy with what it's got. I think he's just slightly concerned about what it's got coming down the pipe. But I don't want to speak on behalf of government. That would appear to be my reading of the message. So that's how I'd see it.
Okay, thank you. Do we have one more question from the floor? When you go, Hugh, I think I'll make this our last question, if that's okay.
Thank you, Rufus. You talked about the outputs of GBRTT. They feel to me to be quite functional, maybe tactical. That's not a criticism. But you talked about the tools for use that you developed for use in the new model. And you talked a lot about commerciality and fares. You don't really talk very much about strategy. What is the balance between social value and commerciality? Ultimately, what is the railway for? What is its purpose? And I think that feels to me that they're the sort of questions you need to be asking and answering before we actually take it forward and go down to a granularity level, if that makes sense.
Okay. A very good question, and so I'll give you the kind of historical reason why, but let me tell you why you're right in the first case. When I first came into this role, i.e. government side in the leadership of reform, one of the things I discovered was everybody had a strategy. There was a strategy for this and a strategy for level boarding, and there was a strategy. Everything was described as a strategy. And you're going, well, on what basis are you writing your strategy? Where is the vision for the railway that allows you to be so confident that you're right? And the answer was, well, clearly we didn't have an overarching strategy. And the government, I think again, Lord Hendy was quite instrumental on this, said we need a whole industry strategic plan. It's known as the WISP, got a name change to long-term strategy for rail. And that was a GBRTT output. The challenge was that the last government, whilst it had commissioned that, was not necessarily ready to receive it. And as a result, by the time we got after the general election, the new government decided that the best place for that work to be done was under the shelter of DFT. So we gifted our, not all of it, but we gifted a large part of our strategy team to the department under Elaine Seagriff. They're working there for the department, and they are working on both the rail strategy and indeed the integrated national transport strategy, both of which are live work streams under government at the moment. So the answer is no, we didn't deliver, but I think that was partly about the last government's appetite for receiving it, and this government is definitely up for it and has taken our people. Slight tangent, you can't always wait for the big strategy before doing the other one. So let me just talk about 2 or 3 things where we did make progress. We have done a lot of work on accessibility. Accessibility is, of course, governed in part by law, so one is obligated to move in a certain direction, and we've done a lot of work. We've shared that with government, and whilst it's not emerged as a strategy, it is currently supporting the government's work on that. The second thing we did was we produced a freight growth target. Now, you can't produce a growth target without imagining why you would do it or what you were trying to achieve. So we did do a bit of work on freight growth that we took some thoughts and decisions away from a broader strategic intent. And that was one of our more popular and successful things with the last government and this, the 75% growth by 2050. So we were able to do that. And but you are 100% right. Without the vision, you're going to struggle. But the government is doing that.
Okay. I've just got a last minute one from online, and I'll paraphrase it a little bit. It was a bit about when we moved into privatisation, it was almost that culture that kept us together. We're still railway men and women who wanted to make it work. I suppose, how do we harness this the culture of the railway to make things work, and everyone working to have common purpose and have that motivation to do things? So it's more of that cultural element. How do we get the 150,000 people who've got in a railway focus on delivering?
So if I can, I'll infer a couple of questions within that question. The question one is I've got the old World War II poster of "And Still the Railways Keep on Running," and it was about the blackout, and no, you couldn't see anything but the whites of people's eyes, because that's what people had to live with. And the railway survived both the First and Second World War on a cultural thing of the railways will keep running. Of course, it had to be recapitalised after both wars, because the one thing that hadn't kept on running was maintenance and renewal. But the operations kept going. So I'm a big believer that the culture of "And Still the Railways Keep on Running" has kept us going through COVID, has kept us going through reform and some of the issues that have sat around reform. But a bit like Wile E. Coyote, as he's running in thin air at the edge of the cliff, you stay level for a bit and then you start to realise you're in descent. And so when I talked about the retreat of commerciality, I'm really talking about all those commercial directors who don't actually have a job to make revenue any longer are now probably saying, well, maybe time for me to leave. So I think we've actually got to quite proactively incentivise that culture to come back. Now, I'm probably not the best person to say what are the abstract features of culture you'd want to secure, but I've talked about commerciality. I've talked about diversity. I think there's a couple more I'd certainly put in the list. Do not make railway jobs only available to people who have railway specialism. Why would you not try and open up pathways into rail by making your jobs less railway specific, more generic, and out of rail? Because we can't always promise to promote people in the line to give them their journey up. We have to allow them in or out. And I think that is a culture change that needs proper incentives. Finally, I think the collaboration and working together, which is the second part of the question. How do you keep that going? People do want to collaborate. I genuinely believe it is a natural order of things that they want to collaborate, possibly sometimes unhelpfully, rather than actually focusing on the task. They want to spend too much time with their mates. But at a broad level, collaboration good. And I think we need to quite quickly start practicing this. So there's no GBR, but we do have an opportunity to bring track and train together with public ownership. We saw it a bit in the north. We've seen it north of the border. We will see it soon in other parts of the country. One thinks about Southwestern. That is an opportunity to bring teams together and say, absent a contract, what would you do to make the railway better? We can practice it now. And I think that will release a huge burst of energy, actually. Really do. Because I'm really optimistic about that. Needs a bit of facilitation, still need the benchmarking, still need the measures. But fundamentally, it's a really exciting time.
Brilliant. That's the end of your question. You
I can sit back down again, can I? Thank you.
Well, just a couple of thanks. Firstly, thanks to the IMechE staff, background staff, the food we've had today and all that. So a lot behind the scenes. So thank you for that, all the organisation. A big thanks to everyone in the room. There's a really good audience tonight. And that's what really makes these nights. There's nothing worse than having a fantastic speaker up, having fantastic Q&A when we don't have a big audience. So it's really good. We've got a good line and room. And also our virtual audience here. So I don't know how many are out there. Warm welcome. It's really good to have you in the room and partaking. And thanks for your questions. So big thank. Just what I loved about what you're talking about there. Firstly, I was right. But although he's part of Interfleet, he was part of the Transport Advisory, the big brain brigade, as I would call them. Yes, you have. You answered the question fantastically well, so thank you for that. Lean and dynamic thinking, trading mindset, economic benefit, better efficiency. Reflecting on that, that's things I probably heard 10 years ago or 15 years ago. I don't really hear much of now. And I think it's very true. That diversification, open pathway about getting people in from other walks of life and out as well. There's some real nice bits about that. You go, tell me that feels about right to me. So, yeah, for me, you've ticked a lot of things. Okay, so, yeah, I'll follow that. So a real thank you for coming along. And I was delighted when I managed to land. So I've landed Peter Hendy and yourself. I'm doing really well. So, as a small gesture of my gratitude, I bought you a bottle of whiskey.
I'm not allowed to accept it, though. You know that.
Well, at this level, you can. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Fantastic.
And don't forget, we'll have other fantastic events. Hopefully, our people will put some other fantastic events. I think it's 8th of May. Book now, and good to have a great audience. So thanks for coming along. Have a great evening. Safe journey home. And thanks again, Rufus.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you. Thank you very much. That's very fun. I still probably not actually. But I thought.
Peter Hendy accepted something similar.
Yeah.
So